Hello and welcome to another episode of Before the Bell, where myself and Joey Knight will be reviewing all of the amazing fights that are coming up on the 2023 season finale on Saturday, November the 18th at the Epsom Downs Racecourse in Surrey. And Joey, I don't say this lightly, but the card that we have got coming up to finish the season is absolutely unbelievable. And today we're going to be going through everything. We're going to review the fights from the main event all the way down to some of the other amazing title fights. And I've got to say, as far as a card goes, as far as the quality from top to bottom, when they talk about saving the best till last, I think November the 18th, Epsom Racecourse, this will be arguably the card of the season.
Yeah, I think so. I think this is one of the things that separates Quest from professional boxing almost, in terms of, like, on the pro cards, you will see a really good main event and you might even see a good co-main or chief support or something like that. And then as you go on down the card, you'll often see, like, fights that are probably maybe 80-20 in one fighter's favour, very much like matching fighters up to build them through and help them on their journeys. Whereas on this card that you look at, and all Quest cards, if I'm honest, it's just 50-50 fights the whole way through. And obviously the exciting thing about this card is we've got so many fighters, personalities, sort of profiles of the guys fighting that we've been able to go on the journey with them. We've been able to see them develop and build their skill set throughout the tournament, or the competition, I should say. So it's going to be very, very interesting to see what each fighter's bringing to the table now.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, when this card started to come together, I knew that there were going to be some great fights. I knew that the main event, which we'll obviously come on to and sort of and preview first, I knew that fight was going to be an absolute showstopper, but as it's gone on, there's been more and more and more really, really good fights, title fights added to the card. And I looked at the card this morning and I thought, you know what? Across the number of title fights that we've got, there's 6 or 7 title fights on the show, probably I would say 5 or 6 of those would be easily on any other card throughout this season main event. There are so many good fights, from, you know, British title fights to national title fights, all the way down to a couple of novice title fights, which again are going to be absolute barnstormers. And I've looked at the fights, I've previewed and then reviewed some of the previous footage and the previous fights that all of these guys have had in Quest, and I've got to say, you don't really appreciate how good these fights are going to be until you remind yourself of what they've done in the competition earlier this season, last season, season before that. And it all kind of comes together and you start thinking, do you know what? I think this could be the best of the best. You know, it's called The Last Dance, the season finale. And I think what we have got coming up on November the 18th is going to kind of, I won't say blow every other show away, because this year we have had, from, you know, start to finish, some unbelievable fight nights, some unbelievable title fights and some incredible main events. But I think this one is going to top them all. So I'm going to dive straight in, because the main event, and what a main event this is going to be. It was originally scheduled for the main event for September the 9th at the Epsom Downs Racecourse in Surrey. Fight had to be rescheduled due to injury to Hasan Mohammed. So it's back on again. You know, Ami Rahman, he is undeniably the biggest puncher the competition has ever seen. He has a proven track record in not only finishing fights, but, you know, putting pretty much every opponent that has stepped into the ring with him, putting them down at one sort of stage or the other of the fight. He's defending his Quest British Light Middleweight title, and he's fighting Hasan Mohammed, who, as I said, he pulled out injured last time. He damaged his foot in the build-up to that fight. He is normally boxing the weight below. He's the national welterweight champion, but he wanted to step up. He wanted to face Rahman and sees him as the biggest name in the division, in the competition. And yeah, I just can't wait. I can't see this being anything other than an absolute war.
It's very much a clash of styles, this fight. Obviously, Ami Rahman, I think his boxing skills is very much underrated, because I think that when someone's a puncher, the first place we'll cast our mind to is that element of their game, is the fact that we see them with big knockouts and sort of wobbling and knocking opponents around the ring and whatnot. But I actually think that Ami Rahman's got a really good jab, and obviously there's been fights more recently, like the Ronnie Chisholm fight, where he's been able to showcase that a little bit. And he's just so experienced, you know, like he's been fighting not only on Quest, on Queensbury before that, on the unlicensed circuit before that for such a long time, that I think that can only go in his favour. And then obviously it's almost in a way, not to say that this would be the outcome, but like a passing of the guard type fight, because you've got, what's his opponent's name? Mohammed.
Hasan Mohammed.
Hasan Mohammed. You've got Mohammed, who is obviously up and coming. He's a fighter that, when I first saw him in the competition, I was expecting him to have had a lot more fights than he had actually had, because I saw he had some slick, sort of silky boxing skills, shoulder roll stance, and he was a fighter that I thought would have very high expectations going into the competition, and a high ceiling of where he can get to. But you can't deny, and I don't think he'd take offence to this, because even he would understand this, you can't deny that he's taking a big risk early on in his career, because this is a fight that, you know, you would normally expect the likes of an Ami Rahman to be going in with someone with a lot more experience. But he clearly, you can see from his boxing style, Mohammed, that he massively backs himself, very confident, flamboyant in a way which is really good, and shows that confidence in the way he performs in the ring, and also now showing the confidence in having the heart and the courage to be able to step up to a massive test like this. And from his point of view, it could be a really well calculated gamble, because if he does win this fight, and if it does pay off for him, then the world's his oyster in terms of, you know, he will be right at the top of that division, and he'll be the man for the other fighters to then be calling out and trying to target as things progress.
Yeah, I think if you look at this fight, when you talk about risk reward, you know, what's the risk and what's the reward? Obviously, the reward is plain to see, you know. If Hasan Mohammed comes in and beats the number one Ami Rahman, he catapults himself to the top of the light middleweight division. He's the British champion. He's the number one in the division. And he beats somebody that many are tipping to be one of the sort of the Quest all-time greats. The risk is, like you say, that maybe it's a step too far for him too soon. You know, we've seen some great performances from Hasan Mohammed, you know, the fight against Mark Creedy, where he stopped Creedy, who was an experienced campaigner. Azat Yousefi at the K2 Arena in Crawley. You know, Hasan Mohammed won that on points. And it was a great performance, because Azat Yousefi is a very good technical boxer. And that showed his kind of level in terms of his technical ability. Although he's not that experienced, you know, he's nowhere near as experienced as Ami Rahman. He's got something about him, and whether it's that sort of confidence, whether it's that style. I mean, he trains with a great team down in Reading in Berkshire. I mean, his coach, Thomas Tank Jarvis, was a pro himself, very experienced. He's got some great sort of people in the sort of the camp. You know, I went down to interview him for the last fight before he pulled out, and he had the likes of Asinya Byfield in the gym with him. So it's a tough training environment. He's very confident. I mean, he goes by the moniker Big H, and, you know, not that we've seen it in the competition so far, but all of his team around him say, you know, Hasan Mohammed can punch. You know, we saw that in the Creedy fight, but be under no illusion. Everybody's talking about Ami Rahman. They're talking about his power, which everyone has seen, but you haven't seen the power yet that Hasan Mohammed has and can bring to a fight. And we're confident that in this type of fight, you know, Ami Rahman's style is perfect to showcase not only his boxing ability, you know, like you mentioned it there, that slick sort of shoulder roll, you know, throwing the shots, the uppercuts coming in, fast hands, good footwork, you know, moves in and out of range very well, and picks his shots, you know, takes that little half step back and then sort of makes them miss, makes them pay. So yeah, it's there's a big reward at stake here for Hasan Mohammed. And equally, if he does come up short, if he doesn't get the win, still plenty of opportunity for him in the competition. You know, he's still got bags and bags of potential. But, you know, in the build up to this, like I said, I've watched the footage. So I've watched a lot of Ami Rahman's fights. I've watched the fights that Hasan Mohammed, he made his debut beating Josh Ansari to win the regional welterweight title. He then went on to win the national title, beating Mark Creedy, defended against Azat Yousefi. So I've watched those fights. I've watched his progression. He is a very, very good boxer. Got a lot of skill, got a lot of talent. And then I've looked at Ami Rahman. Now, the one thing I'll say with Ami Rahman is, Ami Rahman, as I say, we've talked about his punching power. We saw that in the Ronnie Chisholm fight where, I've always said that Ami Rahman's power is his get out of jail free card. He's always got that there. And when you've got a puncher who that at any moment he can switch the lights out, he can cause damage, he can change the course of a fight. And in that fight against Ronnie Chisholm, Ami Rahman was sort of in stages getting completely, in my opinion, outboxed. Ronnie was boxing well. Ronnie's known for his boxing. And he was making Ami Rahman miss. Ami Rahman was coming in sort of with his head down, trying to throw those big, big overhand rights, and he was getting caught with the uppercut. And I think that showed that Ami Rahman can get outboxed. But what Ami has is this ability to turn the fight into what he wants it to be. And I think Ami Rahman as a fighter is a fighter. And when I say that, I mean that when it turns into a dogfight, when it's kind of like up close and personal and you're trading shots, Ami Rahman is unbelievably dangerous. As I say, you saw him put Chisholm down a couple of times in the fight, changed the course of the fight. Looking back at some of his previous fights as well, he fought Conor Cartwright at the K2 Arena in Crawley. And Conor Cartwright was taller, rangier, great little boxer. Stopped him with a body shot. And then if you go even further back, you look at sort of his debut in Queensbury Boxing League against Jack Warren, where he switched the lights off with Jack Warren, who was a good ex-amateur fighter who was sort of had bags and bags of skill, bags of talent. I mean, there's lots of other fights that I could list where Rahman's shown that power, but it's I'm really torn on this fight. And you should be saying, well, let's look at it. Ami Rahman, he's the more experienced. He's the puncher. He's been there. He's done that. He's got the T-shirt. He has the power in both hands, dynamite in both hands to sort of to knock Hasan Mohammed out, or anyone really in that division. And then you say, well, Hasan Mohammed, he's not that experienced, but he's shown some amazing skills so far. And it would be like you're going to say you're going to go with Ami Rahman, but I just have this feeling that Hasan Mohammed has a really, really good chance in this fight if he sticks to his boxing and does really kind of what Ronnie Chisholm did for the first couple of rounds in his fight with Rahman, stick to his boxing, doesn't get involved, uses his footwork to maneuver out the way, not give Ami Rahman a chance to set himself and get into that position where he throws those big bombs, then, I do think that this is a very, very close fight.
Yeah, I think so. I think definitely when you look at it from that stylistic point of view, Hasan Mohammed's going to have a lot of advantages when it comes to maybe the boxing skill in there. However, as I did say there, I think Ami Rahman's boxing skill is massively underrated. And although we sort of credit him with that ability to punch and be able to turn a fight because of his punch power, we always think of the extreme, which is being able to stop someone coming from behind on the scorecards and knocking someone out. But actually, there's a lot more that goes into having those heavy hands than just being able to stop someone. It's also the ability to being able to keep someone at bay, be able to keep them in their box a little bit when maybe they would want to commit and throw a few more shots because they're hesitant of what's coming back at them. And it's, having that power in your hand is a good way to neutralise opponents. I've sparred people that I know I'm a much better boxer than, but because I know they've got that ability to punch, maybe my output has been decreased because of the power that I know they hold in their hands. So that can be a factor there. The other thing as well is, when I saw Hasan Mohammed, obviously he was in that shoulder roll stance a lot of the time, which is all well and good, when you've got fighters that you're very much comfortable with. However, with the likes of an Ami Rahman, as confident as you are in that stance, you're not going to want to be in that stance if you're on the back foot getting pushed back with shots, because one thing Ami Rahman will do is he'll look to your body as if he's going to go there and he'll loop that right hand over the top. Over the course of 5 rounds, and this isn't to write Hasan Mohammed's chances off of being able to do it because, you know, from all accounts, he's a really, really capable fighter. And from what I've seen of him, I've been very impressed by him. I rate him highly. I think he's a very good fighter. However, over the course of 5 2-minute rounds, small ring. It's not like they're boxing the Olympic-size rings. You know, for boxing standards, it's a small ring, 5 rounds against a really, really tough and, most importantly, experienced opponent in Ami Rahman. You're going to need to be fit as a fiddle, sharp as anything, and as clever as you can possibly be in there to navigate your opponent. Because one thing that Ami Rahman won't do is he won't stop coming. He will probably rather go out, nailed to the canvas, like we've seen him do in a fight before against Lafleur, rather than picking up a points loss or something like that. So you've just got to be so on your game against someone like Ami Rahman because they're dangerous up until the final bell.
Yeah, they talk about it, don't they? You know, you've got to be switched on for every single minute, every single second of every single round because, like you say, with that power, it can change in a heartbeat. And then you find yourself, you know, you've been outboxing your opponent and then all of a sudden, bang, you're on the canvas and you don't know how you got there and you sort of, and the fight is over. So, yeah, it's, I've got to say, like I say, as a main event, this is a phenomenal fight. And it's going to answer a lot of questions. It's either going to tell us, do you know what, Ami Rahman, you know, he's already proved he's the real deal. He's already proved, you know, how good a fighter he is. But for me, this would kind of cement his legacy and show that, you know, he faced everybody. He faced all of the sort of the challenges. He faced everyone that sort of either called him out or wanted to fight him. You know, he has faced those opponents, like I say, with the Ronnie Chisholm fight. That fight, when Ami was coming into that fight, I thought this is going to be a hard fight for him. This is a real, genuine test because of Chisholm's boxing ability. And Chisholm had already been a British champion at the weight above. I thought this is going to be a hard fight. And in the end, Ami Rahman made it his fight. He made it that dog fight, landed the power shots, landed the big bombs, and made it sort of quite conclusive that, you know, I'm the man in obviously the 11 stone division. And I think if he goes in there on November the 18th and puts in a performance and beats Hasan Mohammed, I think he can leave with his head held high and, you know, like I say, cement that legacy that, you know, I was the one to beat in that division and nobody did. On the other hand, like I say, Hasan Mohammed has everything to gain and really nothing to lose in the fact that, you know, he's coming into this as many people will see him as an underdog because Rahman is much more well known. You know, he's been in the competition. He's had some unbelievable nights, unbelievable wins, some sort of highlight reel knockouts. And I think that there's an argument, and I'll say this for both, there's an argument where I could sort of, you could say, well, Hasan Mohammed has the ability to outbox Ami Rahman. If he stays out of danger for the 5 rounds, he's obviously he's got the possibility. We've seen Rahman hurt only the once, but he got hurt, like you said, in and sort of and stopped in many years ago, which was his only loss. But there is that there that he could potentially, you know, if Hasan Mohammed can punch as hard as his team say he can punch, and Ami Rahman, the one thing I'll say with Rahman, which I've noticed in fights, is when he's coming forward and when he's throwing those big bombs, he tends to look down and kind of throw the shot blind. Not that he's not throwing it, he knows where the target is, but he tends to sort of duck his head down and throw the overhand right and the kind of left without actually looking at where they're going. But he knows that, you know, he's worked on that shot. He's trained that shot on the heavy bag in sparring, so he knows where the target is. But there were a couple of occasions in the Chisholm fight where when he was doing that, he was getting caught flush with the uppercut. And I think Hasan Mohammed has the ability to pick those shots. He's got the timing. Whether or not he can do it is another question, but that is a vulnerability that he could get caught with that type of shot and then find himself, you know, as I say, in a bit of trouble. But we haven't seen that in his Quest career. He's been dominant, you know, he is the man to be. I've seen stuff on social media he's been posting, you know, he is so up for this fight. He knows what's on the line. He wants to put in a performance. He's main event. It doesn't get much bigger than that on the season finale. So, as I say, it's, I'm going to ask, you know, just as I say, prediction-wise, you'd have to say Rahman is the favourite, but don't write Hasan Mohammed off. But what are your thoughts?
If I had to put my money somewhere, I'm going to go Ami Rahman in that fight. And that's it's never nice to have to predict a fight because obviously, you know, I see these boys at the shows and stuff like this, and I've got respect for anyone that gets in the ring. Hasan Mohammed is a fighter that I was massively impressed by when I saw him. Very, very good fighter. I just think if maybe I'm too cautious. If it was down to me, I'd maybe map him out a little bit of a different route than taking this fight right away. And that's nothing to do with the ability of Hasan Mohammed himself. It's just how highly I rate Ami Rahman. And the way I sort of look at it is almost the narrative on this fight. You would think it's like boxer versus puncher. However, I back Ami Rahman's ability to be just as good a boxer. That is something, you know, I've seen in boxing fights. And also, there was the guy that Hasan Mohammed beat. He also fought Ami Rahman, didn't he?
Azat Youssefi?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they have fought.
They did fight. I'm pretty sure they fought at the Troxy. They fought somewhere. I'm pretty sure they did, you know. So that's obviously one fighter that I look at and I think, okay, well, he was a sort of bit of a slick, nice, long boxer. And Jack Warren, and I was trying to, earlier on when we were talking, I was thinking, I know his name was Jack, but what was his surname? Jack Warren, who Ami Rahman fought. Mate, he had a lovely jab and a really good style in terms of keeping his hands nice and tight. I'm sure he had been an amateur before, hadn't he?
Yeah, he'd had a decent. He used to sort of he used to be an amateur at the same gym as Joe Seabrook, who boxed in Quest. Who, you know, they've come from that sort of amateur background, and you know. And then you also look at the fact that although they never fought, Ami sparred a lot of rounds with Alex Bellingham.
Mm-hmm. Alex Bellingham, who was obviously a top fighter on the league, and obviously he again would be someone that you would look at as someone with the ability to have that sort of amateur back foot boxing style, pinging the jab, uppercuts when they come through and stuff like that. And by all accounts, from what I haven't seen and what I have seen, Ami Rahman, every time apart from the Solomon Lafleur fight, which, let's be honest, in a fight like that, it can go either way. But any time apart from that, I've always seen him have the antidote. So it's nothing to do with not backing Hasan Mohammed and not thinking that he's a really good fighter, because I genuinely do think that. But I just think it would be foolish on my behalf to go against Ami Rahman.
That's good. Like you say, I mean, yeah, we always talk about the fights, and we could keep arguing and we could keep looking at it different ways. But I think, you know, however this fight plays out and whoever walks away, whether it's and still for Ami Rahman or and the new for Hasan Mohammed, I think as this fight gets closer on the day of the show, as you're watching the undercard, as you're watching some of the other big title fights, you're always going to have this fight in your sort of in the back of your mind thinking it's getting closer. And then as they make their ring walks and they're standing in that ring, and you've got that big fight anticipation where you get that little bit in your stomach where maybe the leg starts to twitch a little bit and you get the adrenaline dump and you're thinking, I'm looking forward to this. I think this is going to be a good fight. And you know, however that fight plays out, you know, whatever game plan each of them brings, it's going to be a great fight because of the styles that they've got. It can't be anything but a great fight. So, yeah, that's the main event. And I'm you know, there's so many title fights to go through, so many big fights. And the next one, we know them both incredibly well. You've obviously fought and beat one of them. And the other one has been the only man or the first man to win all the belts from novice, regional, national and British in the competition. And I'm talking about Dexter Horton, who he is fighting a massive rematch against his old rival, Seb Hallett. It's a fight that, you know, both of them didn't think would happen on this show, but for reasons, you know, that have sort of brought them together, the fight is on. They're fighting for the vacant British lightweight title. And like I say, we've seen them both in the competition many, many times. You know Seb, you fought Seb, you've beaten Seb. And I've got to say, again, this fight wasn't on the radar, but when it was made and when I revisited their first fight, which happened at the start of the 2022 season, I've got to say, I'm really, really excited for this one.
Yeah, I can't wait for this one. Obviously, I make no secret of it. I'm a good friend of Seb's. I usually do his corners sometimes on the night with Arthur James and with his other coach, Mark. And I was actually in the corner for this first fight. And Seb's a fighter that throughout his time on the league has just come on leaps and bounds. Like, you know, you made the point there of saying that I've beat him. That's many, many moons ago, mate. Seb would probably give me a good old pasting if we fought now. So the trajectory of Seb Hallett's career has just been phenomenal, really. And it's crazy, isn't it? Because I always knew, like, he was very committed, very game and stuff like that. But I'll be completely honest, and I'd say this to Seb, like, if when I fought him, you had said to me, this fella's going to go on to become one of the biggest names in the competition, and also, not only that, one of the most dangerous fighters in the competition, because one thing that has sort of evolved with Seb's game is his ability to punch. Like, we've seen him with a couple of absolute highlight reel knockouts now, and knockdowns. And obviously, I know from a personal standpoint how much this fight means to Seb. It was the first fight as a brilliant fight, wasn't it? Obviously, Dexter Horton came out really, really strong. Dropped Seb Hallett in the first round. Now,
first 20 seconds.
Yeah, and I would say that was a flash knockdown. And I'm not discrediting Dexter Horton, because Dexter Horton can punch. My God, like
he's another one that he carries dynamite in his hands, and even his sparring partners, the guys who are in the gym who are completely different weight classes to him, you know, like sort of 2, 3, 4 stone heavier than him. All of them say when Dexter hits you, it's different. Yeah. It just kind of goes through you. Funny
little story, right? I don't know if you remember this. I used to help you out sometimes at the sparring trials, and I was sitting, and we were in the old light to box gym. Sunday morning, I'd sort of finished up my training, and I said to you I'd stick around and help you with the sparring trials. And when I say help you, I don't mean sparring myself, almost just like doing a little bit of judging of it for you. And there were some good fighters that sparred that day. A lot of fighters that probably went on to make their debuts on formerly the Queensberry League not long after that. But there was a standout that day, and that was Dexter Horton. And that was when he had his first sparring trial. He had never fought on your shows before. And he came down. And I remember thinking, this kid is good. Like, I remember watching him and thinking, mate, he's sort of a level above everyone else at this sparring trial. So I'm guessing he had fights before. But yeah, obviously then going on to the league, me and Dexter shared a mutual opponent in Charlie Martin. And he's been boxing on the league, and especially on your shows, for a long, long time now. The same that I was, and the same that Seb. So he's sort of one of the more established fighters on there, someone that's come up, and like you said, he's won everything that's been put in front of him, more or less, in terms of picking up titles and things like that. And obviously, stylistically, you look at this fight, and I think we sort of know what we're going to get from it. And again, it can seem like a lazy analogy, but this one, again, is sort of boxer versus puncher. On the outset, that's how it looks. But actually, if you know the two fighters like I do, you sort of see there's a lot more layers to it. You know, Dexter Horton has got a really good jab. Seb Hallett is very bouncy on his feet and able to get in and out of range. Both men hold real power. I know Dexter's probably more known for his power, but both men hold power. And I know for a fact that Seb knows, knows how hard Dexter can punch, and I would imagine that Dexter knows the same about Seb. So I think stylistically, it's just going to be a mouth-watering clash, really, isn't it? And I'm very glad for both men that they've had the opportunity to do this again. And obviously, because they're both coming off of a loss. Yeah. Both, do you know what? I'd go as far to say both shock losses as well, really. Both fights that I didn't think they were going to be beaten in. Obviously, Dexter lost on the York Hall Bethnal Green show.
He did, to Sammy Algiers. And to be honest with you, it was a loss that, you know, and this is not coming from Dexter Horton as in an excuse or anything like that. I chatted to him. In the build-up to that fight, I knew that he'd had issues with his training camp. I knew that he had to go to Jamaica for a funeral, which interrupted his camp. And, I'd been talking to him and I was sort of saying, how's your camp going? And he was like, yeah, camp's okay. It's not great, but I've got enough. I'm feeling like I'll be okay. So there were never kind of any excuses. And even after the fight, when I was chatting to him, I mean, for those that haven't seen it, Horton was defending his British lightweight title against Sammy Algiers. Algiers was coming into that fight off a great win earlier in the season. He was an experienced sort of fighter, not maybe so much in boxing, but in K1. He was a very, very sort of accomplished fighter. And Horton didn't look himself from the opening bell, but with Dexter, he has got that power. He had Algiers down a couple of times in the fight. It looked like, he was gonna have enough in the tank to win the fight. And then Algiers, to his credit, got back off the canvas, turned the fight around, flipped the script, and ended up stopping Dexter Horton to become champion. And the only reason that the title was vacated is that Algiers has sort of gone back to K1, and he was sort of, he wasn't going to be able to defend the belt. So it freed the title up, and both, Dexter and Seb were the next logical, Dexter being the former champion. Both of them coming into this fight, both Dexter Horton and Seb Hallett were both chasing different rematches for different reasons. Obviously, Horton wanted the Algiers fight, wanted to right the wrongs, but that wasn't the Dexter Horton that we'd seen before. The one that had fought the likes of Sean Haylock in an absolute barnstormer of a fight on season 1, who'd beaten the likes of Ollie Stone, who'd obviously beaten Seb Hallett earlier on in season 2. It wasn't really his best performance. And I think, talking to him, I interviewed him recently, and I said, in my opinion, you probably came into that fight thinking, do you know what? It's been a terrible camp, but I'll still have enough to get by. I'll still have the power. I'll still have what it's going to take to win this fight. It won't, sometimes, I'm going to have to dig a bit deeper, but I still had enough. But what he found out on that night was, at that level, he isn't going to have enough if he's not in the best shape that he can be. And my point to this is, coming into this fight, I spoke to him and I said, how's training been for this one? He said, training has been perfect. He said, we've still got 3-4 weeks to go. Training is on point. I'm feeling fit. I'm feeling strong. And you're going to see a totally different fighter. I've got a point to prove. And this wasn't a fight against Hallett that I was was on my radar. But now that the fight is made, now that I know, I'm really looking forward to this. And you're going to see a different person. And I'm coming for the stoppage. I'm coming for the knockout. And equally for Seb Hallett, he was chasing the rematch with Salah Triple M Busick, who's gone back down to super featherweight. And I know that for a long time, Seb Hallett wanted this rematch with Dexter. The first fight, I watched that fight again, and it's funny how you remember things slightly differently. But when I watched that fight back, they talk about nothing to do with boxing, but first impressions count. So coming into that fight, like I said, in the first round, first 20 seconds, Seb Hallett got caught, and it was a flash knockdown. It wasn't like concussed where he struggled to get back to his feet and he looked dazed and confused. He got caught early, but I think that first impression with the judges was a massive factor in Dexter Horton winning that fight, because when you then go on to watch the fight, obviously it's a big first round for Dexter Horton. So as a judge, as a fan, you're looking at going, big round for Dexter Horton. The next round, Seb boxed really well, like you say, bouncy, up on his toes, flicking the jab out, lovely movement. Dexter was sort of trying to land those big shots. Third round, again, good movement from Seb Hallett. Dexter had his sort of successes, but Seb was boxing nicely. And then in the fourth round, Seb got caught with a couple of big shots that really rocked his head back, and he sort of went back to the ropes, and Dexter was unloading and sort of and I think because of that knockdown, people watching that fight were constantly thinking about that knockdown, the early knockdown, and it was almost like too big a mountain to climb unless Seb Hallett had sort of maybe put a big dent in Dexter Horton and sort of put him down to kind of equal the score. So Dexter won on points. And it was an unbelievably close fight. But yeah, I think this one, like you say, they're both coming into this off the back of a loss. But since that first meeting, like you say, Seb Hallett, he's gone on. He's won the regional and he's won the national title. A fantastic performance against Nicky Slatcher. The highlight reel knockout against Stephen Donnelly at the K2 in Crawley, which was, arguably one of the most brutal knockouts I've ever seen, not only in Quest, but in any event I've ever promoted. That was, one of those ones where you look at it and go, that was a sickener. That was a genuine lights out moment where he stopped and he's sort of shown that power. I know Dexter Horton has said, those fighters are not Dexter Horton, Stephen Donnelly, Nicky Slatcher. The ones that Seb Hallett has beaten, they're not on my level. So comparing those sort of finishes, yeah, they're good, they look great, but they're not me. I'm a totally, totally different fighter. And I know that Seb Hallett's coming into this fight, if Seb Hallett beats Dexter Horton, he's instantly the new number one in the division. He's the man to beat. The stakes are high. And for Dexter, he gets back onto the top and all he wants to do is fight the best. So it's actually, there's a lot at stake in this, because for one of them, they're going to be the number one, the person to beat in the division, the British champion. And for the loser, that's back-to-back losses. You kind of got to ask yourself, not that it's the end, but you would be looking at that thinking, I can't come away with another loss. I can't. It's, even though it's a big fight and there's still plenty of fights out there, I can't sort of lose this one. So, I mean, break it down from your perspective. We know it's going to be a good fight, but how is this fight won and lost?
I think, from Seb's point of view, when we talk about the possibility of taking a loss, Seb's been there and done it when it comes to coming back from adversity, coming back from sort of defeats when he would have been expecting to maybe win certain fights and whatnot, obviously early on in his career. One thing with Seb is Seb's had it the hard way, the whole way round. Seb came in almost as the opponent, didn't he? The first 2-3 matches that I saw him in fights on the Queensberry, I'm not saying he was fed to the wolves or anything, but he fought me. I was obviously a very, very sort of confident fighter around that time. He fought me in my hometown. I think he would have sold about 20 tickets or something for that fight, which is mad when you look at the amount of tickets he sells now, because he's obviously built his name as such a good fighter, and obviously because he's such a lovely person, he manages to sell a lot more tickets now. I think when he fought me, he probably sold 20, 30 tickets, whereas I'd probably sold 100 or something. And it was in my hometown, literally a stone's throw from where I lived at the time. So in that fight, he was almost going into the Lion's Den and he had a lot going against him. Then he fought Huss, who was obviously before that a really good amateur, a lot more experienced than Seb, and obviously Seb put up a good fight in that one. And then he started to build and find himself on the league and come into his own. But as I say, he's always took hard fights. The Darryl Goddard fight, which is a fight that I still say to this day, I do believe that Seb won. Obviously, the Liam Finlay fight, which is a fight that Seb lost, and I went on to fight Liam. And again, that was another boy that had come out of the amateurs and had been a real tough opponent. So actually, when I look at the fights they've had, Seb's fought, definitely when it comes to the depth and the amount of them, Seb's fought the tougher opponents out of him and Dexter. Mm-hmm. But what I would say is obviously Dexter, again, I can't put enough praise on Dexter. I think he's a brilliant boxer. I think he's really, really good. And I do think that sort of loss at the York Hall show was probably somewhat of a flash in the pan for Dexter. Like you say, camp didn't go well. I've had camps that don't go well. I know how hard it can be, and obviously if there was a family bereavement or something like that, obviously you know, condolences to him, and I understand that must be something that's really hard. So I think that the good thing about this fight is you've got two quality boxers, and I'm not saying that for the sake of saying it. You have Seb Hallett is a brilliant boxer, Dexter Horton a really good boxer, and both of them have that excitement knowing that they do hold the power to end a shot at any minute. And that's a key thing in this lightweight division, you know. I campaigned at lightweight. I used to win fights, but I never stopped no one. I was never even dropping no one, you know what I mean? And I used to think of...
That's because you couldn't punch.
No, I couldn't, not out of paper bag. But no, and that's what I mean. In the gym, I would think, I can punch a little bit. It's a different thing on the night in those 10-ounce gloves. So I've got the utmost respect for both Dexter and obviously Seb in the performances they've shown and being able to stop people. In terms of how I sort of said at first, almost like the boxer versus the puncher here, I wouldn't necessarily go along with it too much when it comes to how these two are going to match up, because I think both men can box. I think both men can punch. I think Seb Hallett has the edge when it comes to footwork over Dexter Horton, because I think that Seb is the fighter that's able to shift in and out of range with a little bit more of what we'd associate with the amateur style of movement, rather than Dexter Horton. But Dexter Horton has got that toughness, that grit, the punch power, obviously, that we spoke about, and he'll be massively determined to win this fight, having come off the back of a loss. Now, a loss for Dexter is a little bit more maybe alien than it is a loss for Seb, because Seb's took losses. Seb's probably took a handful of losses in the competition, whereas Dexter, I can only remember he lost against Charlie Martin early on.
So going back, we're going back a few years. I think he lost to Aaron Thomas.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah,
at Troxy early on, and obviously but from sort of a Quest perspective, from his Quest career, as I say, the Algiers fight was the one that sort of is really. I mean, he's sort of everyone else he's beaten.
Yeah.
And he's gone through the division. So yeah, but it's a good point. I mean, like you say, Seb Hallett on his resume has fought some very, very good fighters. And the problem with the way that Quest and before Queensbury were matched is that it's all based on, like 50-50 fights. If you were talking about a young prospect in the professional ranks, and you know exactly how it works, and this is not a criticism, it's just how it works. The prospect will fight the opponents to build up their experience, and they might not reach the kind of 50-50 fight real pick'em fights until they've had maybe sort of between 8, 10, 12 fights. Whereas as soon as you come into the Quest competition, you're fighting opponents who, they might have had more fights on paper, but they're still, in terms of ability, it's 50-50 or, 60-40. It just depends, who's available, the weight side of things. But, that's why a loss doesn't mean anything in the competition. And I say that to boxers time and time again. It's just like they've come into the competition, they might have had a loss, and it's just like it doesn't matter. The league is about putting the best with the best. You work your way up and down the rankings. A loss isn't catastrophic. You can bounce back, and there's been plenty of fighters who have come in and experienced loss and then gone on to win titles and become sort of one of the best in the division. So I think, like I say, it's both of them are going to want to win. Both of them are hungry. And like you say, it's interesting when you bring up the point about, Seb has shown power in his sort of in his previous fights against Donnelly and Nicky Slatcher. We know Dexter can punch. And I think for this fight, when I'm looking at it, I know that Dexter wants to make a statement. I know Dexter wants to come in here on that fight. And, he said, it's not going to go to the judges. I want to sort of, I'm going for the stoppage. And equally, me personally, I think Seb has to do what he did in rounds 2, 3, and the first part of 4. Be on his toes, box and move, and not even look for the power punches, just look to frustrate, to outbox, to move, and not get himself into that position where Dexter maneuvers him to a place where he can unload those power shots. And if Dexter's at the right range and Seb's at the end of those shots and he lands, then, Dexter has shown he's got the power. And equally, even though it was kind of like, we've talked about the problems in the training camp, if Seb catches Dexter, that'll be interesting, because as a fighter, as much as you want to be confident, as much as you believe in your own ability, the brain will tell you if you've had to, if you've been knocked out or if you've been stopped in a fight or, you've taken big punches, the brain will remember that. And sometimes your punch resistance can go just from that one sort of, flash knockdown or that stoppage where all of a sudden the brain remembers it. And before you know it, you're like, I used to walk through those shots. I used to eat those shots. Those shots would have bounced off me. But it's going to be interesting, like I say, because they're both coming in with a lot to prove, a lot on the line. But like we've said, both coming in off of losses. So, intriguing. Can I say a prediction? I think if Seb Hallett sort of boxes to his best ability, he can win this. But equally, I think, not sitting on the fence, which I'm going to do. I think if Dexter can box, show that aggression, be relentless and not give Seb an opportunity to box, I think he's obviously shown in all his other fights, except for the Algiers, that, he'll grind you down, he'll work you, he'll find a way to win. So, yeah, it's a cracking fight.
Yeah.
Just one of many. I mean, I don't know if we're going to have time to go through this. We're gonna sort of flip through them, but there's one fight that I was out earlier interviewing the Quest national light heavyweight champion Eri Seljukai, Now, he won the title in September. Great fight against Adam Smith, who, again, I know you know very well. And he's up against the regional champion, who's also undefeated in the competition, Cornet, the Warrior Scott. Yep. Now, this is, again, I feel like a broken record, but this is another fight that could be main event on any other show of the season, has the potential to be fight of the night, and again, has all the ingredients to be an absolute barnstormer. So to give you, or not to give you, I know you know the fighters very well, but to give kind of sort of those looking in a bit of an overview, you know, Eri Seljukai campaigned at super middleweight. He won sort of the novice and the regional title in the competition, moved up to light heavyweight, and last time out beat Adam Smith, who was a two-time sort of national title challenger, or sorry, regional title challenger before. A very, very good boxer. Again, because of the nature of the matchmaking and their, 50-50 close fights, it never had gone his way. But looking back at that performance for Eri Seljukai in September, by far and away the toughest test of his Quest career. He was asked questions in that fight by Adam Smith that he'd never had to answer before. And he came through it. He stopped Adam Smith in the fifth round. Some really hurtful shots that, really gave the referee no choice but to sort of step in and stop that fight. But you could see, and I've watched that fight back now, you could see that could have been Eri's undoing on that night. If Adam Smith had been a little bit fitter, he took the fight at late notice, but he asked questions that Eri hadn't been asked before. And at times, Eri looked a little bit, I won't say one-dimensional, but he looked like he was lacking in ideas as to what to do next if these big shots that he normally sort of connects with and sort of stop people, they weren't having the same effect on Adam Smith. So, yeah, there were definitely some sort of chinks in the armour that for the first time we saw with Seljukai in his Quest career. And equally for Cornet Scott, I've got to say, when he first came into the competition, he beat Aiden Hibbert on his debut. He then went on to draw with Adam Smith, beat Adam Smith in the rematch. He beat Toby Matthews to win the title. And last time out, for me, arguably, it's going to go down and be very close as one of the fights of the season down in Brighton when he fought the undefeated challenger, Reece Collins, in an unbelievable fight that literally, when they talk about leaving nothing in that ring, they both put on an unbelievable fight. Obviously, Scott won the fight, won it on points. But, yeah, coming into this fight, I think that Eri Seljukai, although he's the champion, for me, he's going to have to show something he's never had to show before if he's going to retain this title, because I think this is going to be a very, very tough fight for him. I know it's going to be a war. I know he knows it's going to be a war, but from the chat from both camps, I think this is just going to be straight away from the moment the first bell sounds, they're both going to go head-to-head. They're both going to collide, and it is really going to be last man standing. Yeah,
I think that Cornet Scott is the one that's taking a bit of a step up here. And to sort of contradict myself, when you were reading out his record there, it's really impressive. He's obviously fought some good fighters. They've got a mutual opponent in Adam Smith, who's obviously a very good fighter. But what I would say is Eri Seljukai is a fighter that throughout his sort of couple of years now on the league has always really impressed me. And I think he's got somewhat of a sort of pro style about him. I think for someone at that weight that they box at, he's got a big back. He's very he's big at the weight. And you can tell that there's different sort of styles of being a puncher. You've got your punchers that will knock you out of one shot, or you've got punchers that, might not have that one shot knockout power, but every shot they throw is a thudding one rather than tap and bang every now and again. And Seljukai is one that when I've watched him ringside, it looks like every shot he throws is a shot that hurts, is a shot that lands. And I think that his boxing skill is to a very good standard. Obviously, then you look at Cornet Scott and you're like, right, where he's always been in really entertaining fights. He's ticked a lot of boxes in his fights, hasn't he? He's come up against people that you maybe perceive being a better boxer than him. I don't mean better fighter, I mean actually better sort of on the jab boxer than him, and he's come through that. He's been in wars that he's come through, like at the show at Brighton, but he is still sort of fairly new to it in comparison to Selçuk. So I could liken it a little bit to the fight between Hasan Mohammed and Ami Rahman. It's almost like that. Is it a bit of a passing of the guard type thing? The main thing that I would say, if I was giving any sort of advice to Cornet Scott, and it isn't even technical, it'd be more emotional advice, is just be prepared for the cauldron that you're about to step into, because you've boxed at Epsom Downs, you've probably boxed boys that have brought big crowds with them, but the crowd and the support that Selçuk brings is probably like no other on the league. Like, I used to bring a big crowd, you know. I've been on shows with boys that are real ticket sellers and have bought big crowds, and I think the Albanian lot completely blow it out the water, don't they? Like, the support that they give.
In terms of the volume, yeah, it's sort of
100%, yeah. Like, really, and that can be a really overawing thing. As I say, I've never boxed anyone that's had that big a crowd like that. But you know what? I remember I boxed Troy Newman, and he brought a lot of supporters. And I remember being in the ring then thinking, God, this is a bit strange. Like, it's almost like even in terms of the noise. It won't be even on the night with Cornet Scott. He could sell 150 tickets, and it won't be even in terms of the noise. Like, those Selçuk supporters are relentless, aren't they? In terms of really being
it's almost like a football game, isn't it?
That's what I was going to say. Like, in football, you'd call them the 12th man. Do you know what I mean? You got the 11 on the pitch, and you got the 12th man, which is the crowd. That's what you would call it. However, Scott would probably be listening to me now thinking, that don't matter. They ain't in the ring fighting with him. And that's the perfect mentality to have there. And obviously he's shown already that he's battle hardened, that he's got a good mentality, and that he's got the will to win in the face of adversity. So that's what makes it for a really, really entertaining fight, in my opinion. Both two really high-skilled boys that are going to lay it all on the line.
Yeah, like you say, I mean, Selçuk, when we've seen him in the past, in his previous fights, he's kind of like, he just has one pace, and that's forward and just keep throwing shots. You know, he doesn't take the sort of he's not a counter puncher. You know, he doesn't take a backward step. All he does is, like, every punch he throws is there to try and knock you out. Every punch that he sort of lands, you can see has an effect. And, you know, his work rate, his work ethic, you know, he's unbelievably fit. Like, for somebody, and you'll know yourself, to go in that ring and just keep throwing punches for one round is hard. But to keep coming out and throwing the same work rate from round 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, you know, his work rate doesn't drop. And to an extent with his opponent, Cornet Scott, he's the same. You know, that fight that he had, he gave it everything. Like, physically, at the end of the fight that he had with Reece Collins, both of them looked like, you know, there wasn't another round in them. There wasn't another punch in them. They were both exhausted, but they threw everything into it. And, you know, I think that I would say that Eri Selçuk has got lots of great attributes. You know, I still think that in this fight, he's going to have to show something that he's never shown before, because in the Adam Smith fight, he was... there were at times where he kind of, things weren't working. You know, he was getting caught with a few sort of counter shots, some nice shots from Adam Smith, and he kind of looked a little bit like, okay, normally this has worked for me. You know, normally I'm in control and I'm bossing the action, and he was kind of like thinking, right, well, what do I do next? I mean, he showed that determination and that will to win and stopped Adam Smith in the final round, which you could say, well, you know, Cornet Scott's fought him twice. The first time was a draw. The second time he won on points. So if you're looking at it from common opponents shared, Adam Smith, and how the result went, then you'd have to say, well, you know, if Selçuk has stopped Adam Smith, then surely he's the better fighter. But I just think, you know, they're not going to have to go looking for each other. Whether the styles gel on the night, that's another thing entirely, you know, because both of them are very come forward. And sometimes when you get two fighters of a similar style, it kind of nullifies what they're both doing, and it can end up in a little bit of a sort of a, you know, an ugly sort of
clinch fest
where neither of them is finding the range, neither of them's finding the space to actually get their shots off, and they end up sort of finding themselves in that clinch. But I'm hoping that doesn't happen. I'm hoping that all you're just going to do, it's going to be blood and guts, heart on their sleeve, both of them throwing leather, both of them throwing shots. And I think, it's like I said when I interviewed Seljukai earlier, why or who wins this fight, and it's going to be down to really sort of who's got the biggest heart, who's got the biggest chin, and who's willing to go that extra mile. And I think that's what it's going to be down to, is like, I think we're going to get into the fifth round of this fight, and it's going to be all down to one thing, just fitness and determination. Who's going to want it more? Because by the time it gets to that, if they're still there and they're still both standing, it really is going to be, it's going to have been grueling up until that point, and it's just going to be who wants it more.
Yeah, so. I think so. I think that this is definitely going to be Seljukai's toughest test, definitely of what I have seen of him on the league so far. And this will be an opponent that has genuine belief that he can beat him, and won't be shy of getting in his face and really putting it on him. And I think that's probably when we see the best from Seljukai as well.
Well, it's a mouth-watering fight in prospect, and it's going to be like I say, it could be a main event on any other show. That I think would be a worthy main event, yeah. And I'd say it's a national title defense for Seljukai. Both are undefeated, so I think it'll be a fantastic fight. As will the national light cruiserweight showdown. It's a vacant title, and you've got Jack Dowling, who's previously challenged for the title before, up against Kelvin Aduru. He goes by the kind of moniker, aka Pro Boxer. He's kind of been on a few shows, kind of on the kind of fringe of that sort of influencer boxing, right. But he genuinely is, he's a decent fighter. Trains out of a great camp under a trainer called James Wallace, who gets his fighters into unbelievable condition. But, again, I've looked at the fights. I've looked at the previous performances really of both of them, and it's an interesting fight. I know you don't know too much about sort of Adura, you haven't really seen him in action before, but he's unbelievably fit, unbelievably strong, comes forward, tons and tons of belief, not a bad boxer, likes to throw his shots and throws his shots with sort of mean intentions, everything that he throws, he's unbelievably fit, he's sort of peak physical condition. And then you've got Jack Dowling, who we've seen in the league a number of times. Great win back at the K2 Arena against Joe Howard. He actually fought, I don't know if you remember this fight, at Epsom Racecourse. He fought Josh O'Brien, who...
Yeah, I do remember, yeah.
It was a fantastic fight. I know Dowling thought he won the fight, but it ended up being a draw. Yeah. And O'Brien went on to win the light cruiserweight title in his next fight because... Dowling had to pull out for family reasons. So
recently fought Shane Minter as well, didn't he?
Recently fought Shane Minter and sort of and lost that fight. Again, coming into that fight, all sorts of things going on behind the scenes. So that sort of came to light afterwards. But yeah, it's a really, although Jack Dowling's coming into this fight again, sort of not off of the best performance last time. It's a little bit going back to the Ami Rahman Hasan Mohammed fight. You've got Dowling, who's the more experienced fighter, who is just very, very strong, comes forward, throws his shots. And then you've got sort of Kelvin Adura, who, to the league's fans, one fight, a great performance. He won the regional light cruiserweight title, beating Jack Thompson at K2 Arena earlier in the year. And again, it's one of those fights that it could be the experience of Dowling that he's just going to be a little bit too savvy, a little bit too experienced. He's coming into this fight. And I like it when you speak to the fighters and they say, every fighter will tell you, best training camp of my life, everything's going to plan. And then afterwards you get the sort of the real picture because nobody wants to give anything away. But I've kind of spoken to Jack and said, how is training going? Because I know you were disappointed with the performance against Minter. You sort of kind of said afterwards that was sort of embarrassing to watch back, but, there are reasons behind it. But he was literally saying, I'm absolutely flying in training. Sparring is going well. I'm feeling fit. I'm feeling strong. And for me, I've got to put in a performance that, I'm proud of. I've got to put in a performance this time that I know, because I don't think people have seen, apart from the Josh O'Brien performance, people haven't really seen what I can do, and I need to show that. And equally, with Adura, he wants to be the best in the division. He wants to sort of put in another performance where people really start talking about him, because the guys, what the shows are like. The fighters turn up to the shows whether they're fighting or not. It's a bit of a community, a name, and the fighters, it's like, oh, that's Max Charl, that's Lee Cannon, that's sort of that's Ami Rahman. It's the people are known because we try and make sure that everything's promoted, and they you get excited about these fights. But these boys want to put in a performance where people remember their names, where people are talking about these fights for years to come. And I think it's an interesting fight that without going on too much about it, we can't obviously give it the same spotlight as the sort of as the main event fight. But I think it's interesting that they're both at different points of their career. Dowling has kind of said, I've got a few fights potentially left, but I'm going to make them the best I've had. And you've got Adura, who's on the rise, who wants to make a name, who wants to go on and sort of be that number one. So yeah, it's from what you've seen of Dowling, obviously I know you haven't seen a lot of Adura, but how do you rate that?
Well, I think that one thing that we're going to find out in this fight is all the questions that are sort of looming are going to be answered. So say, for example, and I mean this with no disrespect, is Dowling a maybe title gatekeeper? Or is he someone that has put in a couple of under par performances but is able to muster up a career best performance and then take out a sort of young, hungry fighter in Aduri? And then obviously for the opponent, he's going to be able to see if he can go on to be that sort of upper title level. Because let's not have it wrong, like no one not deserving of winning a belt has beat Jack Dowling. Everyone that's beat him has been, he's mixed in good quality opposition, and everyone that's beat him has been very deserving of being able to win a belt and pick up titles on the shows. So if he does get the win over Jack Dowling, then obviously we're going to look at that and go, right, we've just seen a serious sort of contender in title mix here. However, if he doesn't, it sort of answers the question of where Jack Dowling is at. As I say, is he a gatekeeper, so to speak, or is he someone that has underperformed in a couple of fights but, can go on to be a sort of legitimate champion on the shows? And I think that being that, like you were saying, he's sort of drawing towards the end of his career, there's all the more chance, not that he hasn't already, because in the fights I've seen of him, he's sort of thrown hell for leather and put it all on the line, but there's sort of even more chance that he's going to have, not reckless, but, a completely me against the world mentality here when he's going in there and thinking, right, nothing to lose, everything to gain, and I'm going to go and take it to this guy. And I actually think that as much as all fighters will put pressure on themselves, the pressure's not so much on Jack Dowling, because once you've taken a couple of losses and things like that, you can almost go into fights with a bit of the weight off your shoulders.
Yeah.
And I know that's something that's hard to deal with. Like, I remember when I was boxing, you get to a point where you've been winning all your fights and it's like, it's not a nice thing almost. You've got that pressure on you where you feel like you're in a lose-lose situation, because if you win, of course you won, you always win. Do you know what I mean? But then if you lose, it's like, oh my God, he lost. So I think sometimes, and we were speaking about Seb Hallett earlier, this is something that I know has worked in his favour. Sometimes to take a loss, you can actually come back a much, much better fighter, because you've now took the shackles off, been able to breathe and go, right, now it's not about keeping everyone else happy, it's just about me doing my thing here. So I think that I'd be very naive to write Jack Dowling's chances off in this fight because he's taken a couple of losses, because I actually think that could be the making of him, and that could be why we see possibly a sort of career best performance from him in this fight.
Yeah, no, I think, again, it's a really, really interesting one, and I think it's going to be, again, another one of those fights that Jack Dowling, you don't have to go looking for him. He's not the type of fighter that's going to box on the back foot. He's going to wait. He's going to draw sort of the lead and then try and counter. He's very much just come forward, throw big shots, and he really, really wants to sort of land those shots. And he can bang. I've spoken to people that have sort of that have been in sparring with him, and they said, he is heavy-handed. You've maybe not seen it in sort of his fights, but he can bang. And I think the work rate of Kelvin Aduru is a big factor in this, because Jack isn't the young spring chicken, and he'll openly admit that, but Aduru's work rate is phenomenal, and he throws and he keeps throwing, he keeps coming forward, and that can have an effect where, if you're not getting a moment to breathe, it can be really, really tough and it can drain you. So it's a fight I'm really looking forward to. I think it'll be a fantastic fight. And there's still more title fights to come. I'm going to sort of skip through them, but you've got a great fight. Nicky Slatcher, we spoke about him briefly earlier. He lost Seb Hallett up at lightweight. He dropped down to super featherweight, and last time out, fantastic fight, a very, very close fight, but he won the regional super featherweight title, beating Cyprian Strizek.
We didn't get a chance to mention him in the post-fight review that we did the After the Bell at the show, but it came to my mind when you said that he was one of the fighters on the whole card that had impressed me the most, because I saw him against Seb, albeit obviously Seb's a level above the guy that he fought, but on that show I thought, God, you've made a lot of sort of fundamental improvements there. Very impressed by Nicky Slatcher.
Yeah, well, he's making the first defence of his crown against the novice champion who's stepping up, Jan Costa. And again, nowhere near as experienced as Nicky Slatcher. And then we saw Jan Costa in action in Brighton where he beat George Bai to win the title. And his debut, Jan Costa, actually, he beat a very, very good fighter in Jamie Porter to, again, a close fight. And he won that fight. So a lot of people, when I made this fight, I made this fight for a couple of reasons. I thought stylistically, we've seen Nicky Slatcher. He's short, he's compact, tight, throws good shots. But then when you look at Jan Costa, he's a lot taller. He sort of throws his shots from wild angles, not as experienced as Nicky Slatcher, but he's got that confidence of a young fighter who hasn't been sort of beaten. I think he's sort of, in his career, I think he's had 4 or 5 wins now, 2 in Quest, 3 outside of the competition. And he's a very, very confident young man. And I know that chatting to some of the team, they were thinking, I think Nicky Slatcher is going to be way, way too much for Jan Costa. I think that's sort of, it's not a fight that I'd have made. And I may be proven wrong here, but I think Jan Costa, although he's not that experienced, he's got something about him that he deserves this shot. I think it's a great fight. He's tall, he's awkward, he can bang a little bit, and I think Nicky Slatcher, like you say, made loads of improvements from the Nicky Slatcher that fought Seb Hallett to the Nicky Slatcher that beat Cyprian Strizek, which was a close fight. I think Nicky Slatcher has made some great sort of improvements in his game, but again, I think this is going to be a great fight. And equally, coming off of that fight, you've got a really, really tasty rematch in the light middleweight division for the novice title. AJ Ahmed, who we were ringside, we watched him beat Timmy Griffiths at a very, very close fight at Epsom on September the 9th. AJ Ahmed is back to defend his title, and he's facing his old rival, George Tui, who they had a very, very close fight at the York Hall earlier on in the season. Ahmed pipped Tui to the decision in that fight. I watched that fight back, and I said actually coming into the fight, George Tui fought at the K2 Arena in Crawley at the end of September, and I said to him he was fighting a guy called Lloyd Martin, incredibly experienced, and I said, listen, the winner of this one is going to get a shot at the title against Ahmed, and Tui was like, I just want to fight him again. I don't care about the belt, I'd fight him anywhere. I just want that opportunity. And whether or not that spurred George Tui on, because he put in a great performance against Lloyd Martin at K2 to set this up. But I interviewed George Tui, and he said, listen, I'm going to be 10 times fitter. I'm going to be 10 times stronger. He said, I'm going to put this on and I'm going to win. And I watched that fight back, and it was a great fight, the first fight that they shared. And AJ Ahmed, to be fair, he's kind of come out of nowhere. He boxed at the beginning of the season, made his debut, I think it was on the Bad Intentions show in February at Epsom. Boxed a guy called Pat Nash, who was very, very experienced. And I spoke to Ahmed's coach before that fight, a trainer called Shane Mills, who just seems to have a habit of producing really good, well-schooled fighters at a Knoll Green Boxing Club. And he said, there's something about this kid. He said he's raw. He's not anywhere near the finished article, but he trains harder than anyone else. He is in the gym. He just puts the work in. He said, and I think there's something about him. And like I say, he's kind of proved that in his fights against Pat Nash, against George Tui, against Timmy Griffiths. He's been very, very active. And I think, coming into this fight, it's a pick 'em fight. But I did watch the fight back between Tui and Ahmed. And although at the York Hall, I thought it was sort of, it was really, really close. I just think George Tui got beaten to the punch too many times and was kind of chasing the fight, where he was kind of setting himself. He was trying to sort of walk forward with that sort of high guard, put Ahmed in a position where he felt comfortable to throw his shots. But Ahmed was just a little bit too sharp and a little bit too quick. And was just landing that extra sort of 2-1. Every time George would land one, Ahmed would land two, and just had that little bit more. But whether or not George Tui has learned from that, and he's going to come out and, like he said, be fitter, stronger, and put the pressure on Ahmed much quicker. There's an extra round in it. The first time they thought it was only 3-2s. This time, obviously, it's championship for the novice 4-2s. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know how much you've seen of both of them and what your thoughts are, but
I was at the show which AJ Ahmed last fought on, and yeah, definitely like a fighter that I was very impressed by. Obviously looks like a real talent, and one that we'll probably see for quite a while now on the league. And in terms of George Tui, I've seen George Tui fight a few times. I'm pretty sure he fought on the same night as me. Did he ever fight Sean Haylock?
He did, yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that was on the same night that I fought. Again, another good fighter, obviously, and in the likes of Sean Haylock and other fighters that I know he's been in with, he's mixed in very good company. So I think this one's got a good fight written all over it, which is, what I'd say for every fight on these shows, because they are 50-50 matchups. And I think the rematch element is always fascinating, because that's when you learn the most about a fighter. Because if you're able to hold your nerve, do the same thing over again, or produce the same result by a different outcome in terms of the style you boxed in, you show just what a talented fighter you are in the ability to make those adjustments and still get the same result. On the flip side of that, if you're able to flip the decision and win a rematch that in the first instant didn't go in your favour, then it obviously shows the resilience you have and probably how much it means to them. So I think rematches are always fascinating. That's why I'm very, very happy to see a couple of rematches on this card. So yeah, I think it's got a very very good fight written all over it, this one.
And finally, I think I'm covering them all. I'll probably miss something because there are so many just to go through. But we're going to look at the heavyweight division, and the heavyweights are always great. I think we saw that back in September at Epsom, the fight between sort of Yawajari and Tyler Walsh, which was an absolute barnstormer of a fight. Two heavyweights who just literally threw leather from the moment the first bell sounded right the way through to the end of the fight. In that fight, obviously, Yawajari fought Tyler Walsh from a great camp down in Ramsgate, trained by Sam Holloway, who used to be a bit of a standout in Queensbury Boxing League, who then turned pro and was undefeated but retired through injury. But Tyler Walsh obviously beat Yawajari at the Epsom Downs Racecourse and gets the shot at Jack O'Sullivan, who, again, undefeated in the competition, huge fighter. I think Jack is he's 6'6", 6'7", very, very tall, very, very strong. Had some great fights and great results. He beat Dave Choppin he's fought Dave Choppin twice, actually, beaten him on both occasions. And Tyler Walsh steps up to challenge him. And it's now going to be for the regional heavyweight title, because the champion, Alex Stockley, has relinquished the title, decided not to defend it. So Jack was the novice champion, but now he's stepping up. He's got the shot at the regional title, which, both of them are excited about. So, with heavyweight boxing, it's always the same, isn't it? It's just, they're two big guys. They're both going in there. Obviously, Tyler Walsh showed what he was made of, relentless pressure. Even by his own coach's admission, he said, listen, Tyler isn't that experienced, but what Tyler has is something that you can't teach a fighter, is that he will just keep coming forward. He'll fight anyone. That relentless pressure, especially with heavyweights, that's hard. If you can't get away from somebody, if someone's putting the pressure on and they're constantly like on your chest, throwing shots, big shots and bombs, and that relentless sort of weight on you, it can tire you out. Whereas, Jack O'Sullivan has shown that he can box, he can move. He's put in a couple of great performances. I think he's 3-0 in the competition now. And it's a really, although it's sort of probably one of the ones that, the fans don't know too much about both of them, I think as heavyweight fights go, this is going to be very interesting.
Yeah, I think Tyler Walsh is a fighter that, obviously, when I watched last time, surprised me quite a lot because he came out against Yao and Yao had a really, really good first round against him. And I sort of thought, okay, maybe Yao's going to push for a stoppage in this one. And Tyler Walsh was actually able to turn that fight around. So that was really impressive, really, because I sort of look at that and I think Yao's no soft touch, you know what I mean? He's a very good fighter himself, and maybe he'll be a little bit disappointed that he didn't get to showcase all the sort of skills he's got on the night. But you've always got to give credit to an opponent rather than sort of downplaying what one man did in the fight. You've got to give credit to an opponent in being able to nullify what the other man did and being able to force them away from their game plan, which is what Tyler Walsh did in that last fight. And then obviously Jack Sullivan is, again, like, he's a mountain of a man, isn't he? He's huge, boxes well for a big man, because some of the time with sort of men of that size, you'd sort of think maybe from a boxing aspect it's not going to favour him too much, but I think boxes well for a big man like that. And again, with heavyweight boxing, you can guarantee that we're going to see a slugfest at times. So you might see a little bit of a cagey affair at first, because I actually do believe that for fighters in that weight division, both of these two can box. Even Tyler Walsh in the last fight, I remember he had his opponent on the ropes and I just saw him sort of shimmy in and feint in a little bit, and I was thinking, it's not the sort of thing you usually see from heavyweight. So I think that for a fight in this weight division, you're going to see a lot of skills on show in this one.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think we've covered all the title fights, and there's a fair few, and there's another that are going to be confirmed, which are some, really, really good fights as well. But that's just the title fights. There's some great undercard fights as well that sort of ones that these guys are kind of on the cusp of challenging for big things, and, they'll be confirmed soon. But I have to say, from the ones that we've talked about today, from the fights on the undercard, there is just a feast of fights to look forward to on the season finale. And then, as I say, we roll whatever happens at the season finale. We start the year next year. The first show of the 2024 season is going to be on Saturday, February the 10th at the Epsom Downs Racecourse, and then on the 2nd of March at the K2 Arena in Crawley. Two big shows already with sort of that are starting to take shape as well. So, yeah, I mean, like I say, lots to think about, lots of great fights to look forward to. I can't wait. It's not that far off now, and they're all going to be, like I say, hopefully they all live up to the hype. They all produce great sort of entertainment for the fans. And as I say, that, unfortunately, Joe, is all we've got time for. As I say, we've talked, I don't know how long we've been in here, but like I say, we've got through an awful lot. And as I say, that is the Quest Boxing League's 2023 season finale. It's called The Last Dance. It takes place at the Epsom Downs Racecourse in Surrey. Literally a feast of fantastic championship action to look forward to, and a stacked undercard. And it all happens, as I say, at the Epsom Downs Racecourse. So I hope you've enjoyed this. This has been Before the Bell. My name's Alan Foley. This is Joey Knight. We hope you've enjoyed the preview, and we look forward to seeing you all ringside on the 18th of November for a huge night of boxing.